For those who don't seem to know, slavery was the cause of the Civil War. There is no negotiation about that.
And welcome back to America Decides. That was President Biden singling out Nikki Haley for recent comments failing to mention slavery as a reason for the Civil War. Haley, who has already backtracked those remarks, fired back at the president. And Deepa, Shivaram, and Molly Ball join us now. Deepa is White House correspondent for NPR, and Molly is a senior political correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Ladies, great to see you and have you here. Happy campaign season. It is upon us. I know we've all been out on the trail together many a time, so looking forward to it again. Molly, I want to start with you because we were actually just talking. I just got back from maternity leave. I was gone for 4 months, and I've come back, and the fundamentals of the race seem kind of exactly how they were in August when I left. Trump with a commanding lead and a question about whether DeSantis or Haley can vie for that kind of second place spot. From your reporting, what have you seen? Is that kind of the state of affairs?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I don't know how you can say nothing has changed. There's been an earthquake for second place. Look, it is true that the fundamentals of this campaign have been very, 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 very steady for really most of the past almost a year. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we have seen a lot of churn in that second place slot. Mm-hmm. We have seen Nikki Haley rise to really, I think, take over second place nationally, even potentially contending in Iowa, starting to have a little mini surge in New Hampshire. But it's all relative, and Donald Trump retains a commanding lead in the Republican primary, and that remains the overarching dynamic of this entire race. I think we've also seen the general election continue to be sort of a stalemate, right? No one has threatened President Biden for the Democratic nomination, despite some efforts by Dean Phillips, Robert F. Kennedy. But the president has really fallen behind in those general election trial heats. Now, a poll is a snapshot. It's how voters are feeling right now. It's not an attempt to predict what's going to happen in November, but it does have a lot of Democrats nervous about the president's political standing.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about that, Deepa, because you're at the White House, but you've also covered Democrats in 2020. We're on the trail a lot. What was so interesting to me in 2020 was when you would talk to Democratic voters, they would always kind of place this premium on electability, right? They were kind of all focused on picking a candidate who could defeat Donald Trump. But talking to Republicans, there hasn't been that. And a lot of Republicans have told me, well, they think Biden is beatable anyway, with anyone. How is Biden and the White House team kind of thinking about all of this? And what vulnerabilities do you think they have with their own voters?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the last question first, right? I think this is going to be a tight election. We know that. It's always going to have been a tight election. And what Democrats are going to have to focus on is not necessarily, they're looking at the voters who are on the line, right? Folks who might be voting one way or another. It's also going to be about enthusiasm and turning out their base. That's something that, polling shows people aren't very passionate about a Joe Biden candidacy, a second term of Joe Biden. So that's something Democrats are going to have to focus on. And what you see Joe Biden doing, especially in these last couple of weeks, he gave that major address at Valley Forge just a couple of days ago. He is targeting Trump and naming Trump. He had a really, strong moment where he called Donald Trump a loser and is starting to use more combative language, taking on his supposed the Republican nominee and really starting to take a stronger pivot point towards taking Trump on a little bit more head on.
So you've had Biden start to take Trump on, but Republican candidates haven't really done that, Molly. I mean, they have started to sharpen the attacks a little bit, but, there's just this dynamic where they can't do it too much to cross his voters, but yet they do have to show some kind of differential between themselves and the person that they're trying to beat. How have you seen that evolve, or has it evolved, and do they need to change it?
No, I do think that particularly, let's be real, there's really two Republican candidates besides Donald Trump still in this race, and it's Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. They're the ones who are going to be on that debate stage tomorrow night. They're the ones we're really watching to see whether they can be contenders at all with only days to go until the Iowa caucuses. And we have seen them sharpen their attacks against Trump in particular. But you're right. First of all, in a primary, voters don't necessarily want to see Republicans attack one another, right? They do want to see them take on the Democrat more. And so that's always a little bit of a tension. But in the case of Donald Trump, who has such a passionate following and who is viewed as a quasi-incumbent and whose political message is all about this us against them, this divide and conquer, where if you're not with him, you're against him, he is very difficult to attack. You know, there was a story earlier, a few months ago, about a Republican PAC that was trying to find ways to attack Donald Trump, and they tested all these different ads, and all of them backfired. Every attack they tried to make on Donald Trump only made his voters like him more. So it's possible that all of these Republican candidates have just faced an insurmountable task from the beginning because Donald Trump's voters fundamentally never really saw any reason to turn away from him and always viewed him as a former president, as the guy who just sort of deserved the spot.
Yeah, and if you see his rivals coming to his defense, especially after every court case, kind of gives them license to continue to support the former president. You mentioned a really interesting point about Trump running kind of as the incumbent, because that's certainly the case in the primary. And then he's also trying to run as kind of the insurgent outsider that he was last time around. I'm curious kind of how the White House is, or the reelection campaign is trying to figure that out. I mean, it has been 4 years, or what will have been 4 years since Trump was president.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really see the reelection campaign laying out the case against Donald Trump, particularly targeting the language that we've seen Trump using, saying that he wants to be a dictator on day one, calling his political opponents vermin. Like, that is language that the reelection campaign has made sure to highlight again and again and again, and reminding folks, you know, Donald Trump may not have been president these last couple of years, but this is still the rhetoric that we're hearing from him, and this is the promises that he's making. And so it's sort of kind of trying to remind American voters who have sort of maybe checked out a little bit from Donald Trump, not too much because he's obviously constantly in the news, but have been able to sort of take a back step to paying attention to Donald Trump all the time and sort of saying, hey, you know, like, one thing that Biden says all the time is, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative, right? And that's something that you really see this reelection campaign trying to drive home constantly.
Trying to drag out voters and supporters with that as well. We'll see how that works out. Molly and Deepa, thank you so much. We'll be talking to you a lot over the next couple weeks and months, and as we charge on to 2024. Wow.